Again, the Middle East is bubbling and boiling, and with it the sofas, i.e., the brains of analysts, are warming and boiling. Bubbles rise to the top with different versions and variations of the explanation of what is happening, and burst, turning into vapor. The blown up sudden so-and-so Hamas reality is propped up by the bones of logic and secured with blue duct tape, cause and effect connections. Despite the many wonderful explanations and promising versions, the questions remain. So, what we saw, and more specifically, what we were shown. Firing hundreds of rockets into Israeli territory, overloading the Iron Dome air defense, explosions and massive destruction. Drone attack of key point techniques. Infiltration through perimeters of armed crowds supported by sabotage and reconnaissance teams, abbreviated as DRGs. There was also information about alarm and public address systems being shut down, possibly hacking into the security loop. Killing civilians, bullying prisoners, taking hostages. What questions do the things you see raise? So, questions: how did such a massive and audacious operation succeed? Obviously, for an Israeli state surrounded by enemies, information about the plans of those very enemies is vital. Clearly, the Hamas party is flooded at all levels with Israeli whistleblowers. Obviously, the military operation was prepared for quite a long time and involved many executors, coordinators and managers. So why did Israeli intelligence sleep through the attack? Option 1. She didn't oversleep, but simply turned a blind eye to the preparations in order to use the Hamas initiative for her own purposes, such as fighting internal adversaries or legalizing a retaliatory strike. Yes, we remember the Jewish reasoning: it is better for one man to perish for the sake of the people than for an entire nation to perish. And also the Jewish Old Testament tradition of dealing with one's neighbors in a harsh manner, even through prior insinuations and provocations. In a harsh development of further events and from a certain angle, the operation could become more and more like 9.11 with all its attendant analogies. But all secret things sooner or later come to light. And sooner or later the all will come out of the bag to nail someone who knew about the attack and covered it up. And given Massad's ties, even in the highest echelons of Hamas, it would not only be a matter of silence, but of organizing a military operation against its own people. And there is bound to be personal gain, and the intersection of interests and other compromising circumstances. Is the current leadership of Israel's intelligence and army ready for the fate and glory of traitors to the people? I guess not. And if they are ready, something immeasurably greater must rest on all. And in that case, we would probably see, or perhaps we will soon see, a more prepared, clear and meaningful intelligence and military response. Option 2. The operation was prepared by the Palestinians, and Massad's connections and knowledge are exaggerated. Hamas could have been trivializing them for years. Yeah, probably could have, but probably couldn't. Even with an operation planned years in advance to dumb down Massad, for one thing, there would have been breaches and leaks. Second, such a long interaction in any case creates reciprocal ties of a purely human nature. Someone would have told someone would have warned someone, and so forth. All in all, an unlikely scenario. Option 3. Israeli intelligence was unaware of the preparations, as everything was not planned and prepared by Hamas, but by a parallel structure. Palestinian militants were involved only when the operation began, as performers and extras. Their successes have in some cases exceeded expectations. This external actor option leads to the following question: who benefits from this attack? Let's find out. Let's start with Hamas leaders. Obviously, for Hamas leaders, a half-frozen conflict with Israel is the most favorable situation. There is money flowing in from the Muslim world. This money is used to periodically carry out terrorist attacks and acts of intimidation. Israel's backlash is turned on by the results of these actions. The backlash provides material, video, civilian casualties, and emotion to wring more money out of the Muslim world. At this point, that wheel is spinning, which makes it reasonable to suspect the benefit of just such a situation for all involved. What do Hamas leaders need to swing the pendulum for? Why go to the bank and bet everything on red? Option 1. Promised more. Option 2. Threatening to take everything I've hard earned. Option 3. The first and second option together. Option 4. The Hamas leaders put the fact that the situation has changed and now we will live in a new way. Now let's take Iran apart. In theory, Iran has the resources and expertise to plan an operation. Exercise control and support for the Palestinian attack. They have DRGs and the ability to hack security. But what's the benefit? Militarily, the whole operation doesn't make much sense. The media, everyone who thinks Israel is an occupier, didn't like it anymore. Anyone who thinks Israel is a victim has not been made any less sorry. In geopolitical terms, there are no special profits, capture of important territories or routes either. Then why would Iran waste its resources, set itself up and run into conflict, presumably by a nuclear power? So far, the benefits have not been seen. Next option. Opponents of an alternative route from India to Europe via the Middle East. I'll read you some news. The United States, European Union, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Israel, Jordan, and India have finalized a historic agreement on a new India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor, American President Joe Biden said after the G20 summit in New Delhi. His words are quoted by the White House press office. The project involves investments in sea and rail transportation, which will facilitate trade, supplies for a stable, prosperous and integrated Middle East. The project is one of the key initiatives promoted by the U.S. to counter Beijing's growing influence and create an alternative to the One Belt One Road Silk Road in sourcing products from China. End of news story. That is, China, Iran, and Russia may be interested in an attack with the subsequent destabilization of Israel and inflaming relations between Jews and Arabs. Yes, such a path would sort of reduce the effectiveness of the North-South options, i.e. Russia, Iran and China's One Belt One Road. But so far such a route does not look economically viable and alive from a logistical point of view, and so far it is not filled with investments at all, unlike alternative routes. So it's all talk and innuendo about unreality. Is it necessary to risk Russia, China, Iran for something that does not pose a threat now and is not certain to do so in the future? Doubtful. The next player is Turkey. Given the Turks' vested interest in the shelf and the importance of the Leviathan gas field in Mediterranean energy, it could be very profitable for Turkey to destabilize Israel. Especially the geographical location makes Turkey a major logistics hub and a likely contender for the most important transit supplies from the south and east to Europe. Especially if done carefully, the Turks are not at all the first in the line of suspects in organizing an attack on Israel. The next player is the opposition in Israel. Benefits of opposition to internal Israeli squabbles. The reputation of the Mossad in Sahel has obviously been damaged, and there has been a noticeable media backlash against the army, intelligence and information attacks against the current Israeli leadership. Yes, Netanyahu can't see any good moves, he is politically practically doomed. Even if there is a temporary unification now, the vengeful Jews of Bibi will strip afterward. The opposition benefits from the situation in the long run, but do the regime's internal opponents have the resources to initiate such large-scale operations? Not likely. The army, too, is hardly willing to shoot itself in protruding body parts out of dislike for Netanyahu. Perhaps some major players in the military, intelligence are personally threatened by the power of Israel's current leadership. It's threatening enough that everyone bet on zero, but it's hard to believe that. Even if Netanyahu pulls out, it is more likely to be exactly pulling out than planning the situation several steps ahead. If players with sufficient resources and obvious benefits are not seen, there may be benefits not in the attack itself or its direct consequences, but in inflaming the situation in the Middle East in principle. This raises a third question. What could be the consequences? General considerations. Hamas's brutal attack on Israel in the equally bloody backlash is completely changing the world agenda and shifting attention away from other issues, including Ukraine. A change in the agenda could have an impact on important issues like the passage of a budget or even the US election program. At this point, anyone can be assigned as the perpetrators of what happened, show the highly likes of evidence, and shake the punchlines and other ironclad arguments in front of the audience. In naming the culprit, heated public opinion in Israel and Europe can be used to launch a military operation. Given that the main contenders to be Syria's scapegoat, Iran, have some cover and will do their best to stall escalation, one could go for the less obvious options in the oil monarchies or even Turkey. With Israel clashing with Muslim countries, the war will quickly involve other countries in the Middle East. The degree of persistence of the participants would make the use of nuclear weapons quite realistic. The war in the Middle East will provoke the flight of Jewish and Arab capital to the US, and perhaps to China. War in the Middle East will boost oil prices. The rise in global oil prices will hit first of all the developing economies and may finally kill the European economy. Also, the conflict between Jews and Muslims could exacerbate the situation in Europe, which has been pumped full of migrants for years. The biggest beneficiaries are the safe havens for capital and oil traders, including the shady ones, i.e. the US and the British. This conflict will lead to instability and will allow to take down the Saudis who went against the US, unwanted governments and change the power in the key countries of the Middle East. That is, the benefit will go to those who have connections and networks in the Middle East and are good at fishing in troubled waters, that is, the British. To summarize, the Hamas attack on Israel does not directly bring guaranteed benefits to any of the visible participants, but rather increases risks, including those of a critical nature. The biggest dividends from the chaoticization of the Middle East go to the Turks and, of course, the Anglo-Saxons. The MO, the work of strangers, the coordinated media bombardment including numerous fakes, the weakening of the victim by embedded agents and the systematic preparation for the attack also looks like a British trail. Given the characteristics of modern warfare that the Palestinians have not seen massively before, large-scale planning, logistics and miscalculating ahead of enemy actions, security crackdowns, well-equipped sabotage and reconnaissance teams with action photography, good use of drones, coordination, we can assume quality and expensive training. There may have been groups of PMC professionals or retired professionals, for example, among the throngs of Palestinian slippers. With further escalation of the situation in the Middle East, the puppeteers may be able to do what they failed to do in 2016 due to Russian interference, or even what they failed to provoke on Russian territory. In the event of a full-scale war in the Middle East, the Anglo-Saxons will have a number of options open to them, ranging from hard pressure on the global economy and China through oil shortages to overturning elections in the US itself and a total change in the global agenda. The hope is that the rest of the players also realize the direction the Anglo-Saxons are trying to drag the world in. Remember though, if you sit down to play cards with a cheat and you know he's a cheat, you're still going to lose. Let's see what the answers of other participants of the big game will be to the questions posed by the puppeteers.